everybody, and welcome back to another painting project. I know it's been a while since my last video, but I am really kind of feeling it today, so let's see what happens. This is a piece called The Twins, for whatever reason. This is not a thing I really know that much about. This comes from a game called Hate, and Hate, the board game, is based on a graphic novel series, I guess, by the same name. And that is pretty much the limit of my knowledge of this setting. I do know that the next 2 months is going to be me painting pretty much every mini available for this game. And normally I like to save the big stuff towards the end because it sort of gives me something to look forward to. But this project really has no lack of cool big projects. This just happens to be the biggest and the coolest, and I really kind of wanted to jump in with it right away. So let me tell you first that this is this is cast in plastic, like a little bit softer plastic. This one in particular doesn't feel quite as soft as some of the others. So, I mean, in general, their plastic tends to be on the harder side of the soft plastics, but in the end, it's still a kind of a board gaming plastic. The nice thing, though, is that the castings on these are actually quite good for this type of plastic. So cleanup was somewhat minimal. Some of the pieces had more work than others. This one in particular had very little cleanup at all to do. I had to, so in shipping, the weapon here got bent back and a little cracked. So I heated it up and put it back into place and added a little bit of glue to provide stability. But really that was the bulk of the work that I had to do on this piece. So in terms of the approach and color scheme, I actually am using the concept art that I think you'll be able to see here for this piece. And so it's a little bit on the dark side overall. A lot of metallic because a lot of the armor plates are metal, both on him and on his beast, whatever. He is a light-skinned individual with some war paint, and we'll be adding that. And he also, there's a ton of layers to this, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what approach I want to take. I mean, one of the things I could do is start with a guy and then work out from there, but there's so much metallic on this. I think what I'm going to do is block in some of the colors to start with the airbrush, and then work in from there. So I think that's what I'm going to do. And let me see. I think a good color to start with is going to be, this is a Warcolors Metallic Lead. This is a kind of a nice dark color, dark metallic. It's similar in some respects to Lead Belcher from Games Workshop. I think it tends to be a little bit darker, but it's a nice tone. I'm going to get the airbrush set up, and we're going to spray some of this on there, and then see what we do next. All right, see you in a second. All right, so as those of you who are regulars to my channel know, I do a lot of my work in airbrush, and this is an Iwata Custom Micron B, CMB, and I'm going to be using, as I said earlier, metallic lead, and my thinner of choice is Createx 4012. They're what do they call it? High Performance Reducer. So the way I normally do this is, there it is. I have it in a dropper. I do about 2, 3, 4, 5 drops of reducer and 3 drops, 2, 3 of paint, and that's my general starting point for all paint thinning, unless I see that a paint is particularly thick or particularly thin. The 5 drops thinner to 3 drops paint tends to work really well for me, so that's what I do. All right. I'm not going to care too much if I get this everywhere, because the whole point of this is that I know that there's a lot of metallic, and we just want to block it in for now, and we can do the other stuff by hand later. Although some of the blocking in will get done with an airbrush as well. One of the nice things about this airbrush is that you can get in really tight when you need to. Which is very helpful in these situations. It's hard to tell on my monitor how this is going to look. On my monitor, this looks a lot shinier than it does in person. Oh, almost out. Do I need more? Yeah, maybe. All right, so the idea here is that, you know, I'll generally look at what a, if there is a predominant color over the entire piece, that's, and you know you're going to be using the airbrush. I mean, that's a good place to start in terms of making the airbrush work for you, in terms of getting the bulk of the color done quickly. And getting things done quickly is what I'm all about. Anyway, so I'm going to clean the airbrush real quick, and then we'll come back. All right, so next step on my base coating spree here, I'm going to be using Watercolors Warm Gray 2. The label's all worn off at this point. The bottle's almost done. This is my go-to color for all of my bone and horn and actually just a lot of things. Anything that might be brown. I will tend to start with this. There's just so many places you can take this with washes and glazes. But in terms of bone colors, it's pretty fantastic. But I'm just going to carefully put this in, and you might be thinking, hey, you're going to overspray that onto the metals that you just painted. And yeah, that's true. I'm going to be careful. Always trying to make sure that my spray is away from the other parts of the model. But that's okay. If I do get some overspray, I can just touch that up with a brush later, and it's not a big deal at all. The whole idea here is to get the bulk painting done as quickly as possible. And anytime I can avoid using a brush, I will avoid using a brush. And so this is just going to go quick. I should also mention that before I started doing this, I did another coat of the lead color, because there were some areas that I didn't hit at all, and as long as I had a full batch mixed up, I went ahead and just made sure that everything had a good solid coat on it. Also, I didn't mention this earlier. Maybe I'll just go ahead and take a moment now. The base was normally just flat, and maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, but I used Liquitex natural sand to coat the base to kind of get it started and having some texture. So if you happen to be wondering about that, and really, why would you? That's the information you needed at that point. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up off camera. Much easier, much faster to do it that way, and I will be back momentarily. Okay, as I said, I like to use this color as a base coat for a lot of things, and I realized that it would not be a bad thing to do it on all of the things that are not metallic, because this is going to be kind of a generally brown, very warm piece. So it's okay for that to serve as the base coat for kind of everything. So not so much on the beast, because he's going to be fairly dark. I probably could have done a little bit more. Obviously on his flesh tones, and I'm also, especially on the flesh tones, I'm using it as a little bit of a pre-highlight, pre-shade. There you go, pre-shade. That's what I'm looking at. That was the word. And I haven't quite decided how I'm going to do his flesh yet, but I may do that next. I have not figured it out. But anyway, yeah, so his fur on the back, the fur on his saddle area, all of that done, but with the bulk of the color being used on the horns in various places, because those are going to be the most prominent use of that color. Anyway, I'm going to give this some thought as to where we go next, and then I will return. Okay, so I have decided that I want to work on the flesh tones, and the next step here is to put a little bit more brightness into those tones, and I'm going to use Watercolors Flesh 2, which is very similar to Warm Gray 2, but it is brighter, and I'm going to go in and just brighten up everything in general. I realized that actually my use of Warm Gray 2 is very similar to how you might approach a base coat when using contrast paints, and that is very much how I paint in general. I feel like the contrast paint line is just sort of catching up to what I've been doing for a long time. But the nice thing about it is that some of those colors are really nice, and I have been using them, and I may use them here. But for now, I just need to brighten up his flesh tones. And I am using a fairly directional spray to again maintain that kind of pre-shading that I mentioned earlier. We get some benefits from using the airbrush, aside from being able to quickly and easily base coat. All right, I gotta get in close, so I'll be back in a sec. So normally, for doing a lot of flesh like this, I would probably start with a deeper brown, darker brown, usually Watercolors brown 1, and then lighten from there with the airbrush. And I'd get a fine result, but since I was looking for something a little paler, I wanted to experiment with using this really light. This is normally a like a super highlight flesh tone for me, but I wanted to start there and then use Guilin or Girly Man contrast flesh here. And maybe not exactly how it is usually used. I mean, sort of. I'm not going to really wash it in as thickly as you might. I'm going to just try brushing it in a little bit more thin coat. More overall, not really trying to wash it. It'll sort of do that on its own anyway. And if this doesn't work out, that's fine. I can go back with the airbrush and desaturate it with the Watercolors flesh. This is actually a little bit more color than I think I want, but we'll see. What I've noticed about this color is that it tends to not be as dark after it dries as it looks when it's wet. So we'll see how this experiment goes. Ooh, that's a little much. Here, let's bring it in a little closer. But the other thing that we can do is if it ends up where I want it, but then I still want more contrast, I can brush it straight into the areas where I want it to be darker and get a really nice effect. I am really enjoying these contrast paints, but I still feel like I'm figuring out where they fit into my painting style. I think I got, oh no, there's a little bit more. All right, let that dry and I'll be back. So that turned out pretty good. Actually, it was pretty much what I was hoping for the most part. But see, now I can go in and see if I have areas that I want to see a little bit darker. I can lightly brush it in. And that'll start to deepen those colors. And if you're careful and you do it, again, you do it very lightly, you're not going to see brush strokes or tide lines. It blends in very nicely with what you put down earlier. Now, of course, I'm going to have to go in and touch up all of the metal around here, and I probably won't be doing a lot of that on camera, so I figured I'd just mention it. Just assume that that's going to be happening, and I might not always tell you about it. I haven't done it yet, though. So you can really start to define those muscles using the contrast. The contrast paints directly applied to the recesses. Think of it almost like a dry brush. Like you're not the paint here. Look at my thumb. See this is where I've been slowly taking the paint off of the bristles. So it's essentially just damp with the contrast. Okay, I'm gonna go noodle on this for just a little bit more, closer up, out of camera, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I did what I said, which was I went back in and darkened up the recesses. Then something else I couldn't really do on camera was I took the Flesh 2 and went back again with that and just did highlights to bring the contrast back up in the other direction, right? Rather than getting contrast by making the other colors darker, making the light colors lighter, but it also gets rid of some of the remaining kind of tide lines left over from the contrast paint specifically in the top of his skull area and some of the broad sections of his chest. I don't mind having a little bit in there. I don't mind having a little bit of that mottled appearance. It actually adds a little life and some depth. But I wanted to knock it down some. So in the end, I think we ended up with some really nice flesh tones with, essentially a minimum of effort. But now I'm going to go in, I'm going to paint the eyes, which is not something I can ever do on camera because there's no way for me to get my head out of the way while I'm doing it and do a good job. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to give some thought as to what's next. So see you in a second. All right, I got the eye in. I'm actually really happy with how that turned out. Just so you know, I use the light flesh tone for the whites of the eye, and then just a black dot. The trick is in the positioning of it, and I think that's a really good location for it. Now I've created a wash using 4 parts of Liquitex Airbrush Medium to 1 part Watercolors Black. And I'm going to be washing the chainmail on the head here to redefine it. Now, the reason I like this mix for this purpose is that it tends to focus in the recesses and leaves the highlight relatively unchanged, and it obviously is going to darken it up some, but this mix does normally work for me pretty well for this purpose, and I would consider using a contrast paint here, but I just don't think it would do it for me. I think it would end up darkening it up too much. And to be fair, because this was a dark metallic to begin with, I'm probably going to have to go in and do another highlight anyway. Whoop. We're back into the... I'm having trouble keeping my head out of frame and keeping the model in frame. Anyway, I'm probably going to have to go in and do a highlight pass anyway, but I felt like this gave me the best opportunity to have the most metallic show through while still darkening up the recesses of the chainmail. In my monitor, this looks black. I'm really hoping that this is going to look better on the final. Oops. Well, that sucked. Get that off of there. There we go. Anyway, I hope this looks better in reality than on my crappy little monitor. All right, I'm going to let that dry and give some thought as to what my next steps are. Okay, I went and looked at the source material and realized that this is all supposed to be more of a brass than a silver, so which is fine. Like I said, I was probably going to need to highlight this anyway, so I am using metallic Choco from Watercolors, and I'm gonna try to shift the color more towards brass. This might actually be a little dark for what I'm trying to do. Oh, actually, no, I think this is going to be good. This is good. It's a little wet, though. Oh. I'm going to assume that the rest of this is all the same, even though I don't have a picture of his back. But it seems to make sense. That all seems to kind of continue on. And I'm not going to worry about this chain right here for now. I'll probably make that more of a silver metallic later on. By the way, this is... probably worth mentioning, this is One Happy Choice, or One Happy Choice, number 1. This is a cheap brush that I got on Amazon. I got 50 of these for 20 bucks, which makes them very inexpensive, and they're not bad. This is the number 1 brush. They're a little long for my taste, but the bristle spring is pretty good. Not good for doing anything where you need a point, but very good for blocking in colors and dry brushing. And since they are less than 50 cents each, I don't feel bad about throwing them away as soon as I feel like they're no longer useful. I recently, and I would almost never do this with any other brush, but I cut one down to make a stippler. And because, again, so cheap, don't really care. But that's what I'm using right now. Anyway, gonna go do the rest of this off camera. I will be back momentarily. You know, when you go looking, you usually find the things you screwed up. For example, I left this area here completely unpainted, and as it turns out, well, that's like a weird mutant arm there, so it should have gotten painted with the rest of it. I just thought it was a like a sash of leather or something, but it's not. So anyway, I was looking at what else I might want to do here. I blocked in these straps here with ivory. And I'm going to wash those with wildwood brown contrast. And then I started looking at his fur back here, and I blocked in the skulls. I started blocking in skulls everywhere using Pro Acryl. There we go. Pro Acryl ivory. And so that's what I'm working on there. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my warm gray 2, if there's anything left in here, and I am going to just overbrush the fur to create some highlights, and then I am going to wash the whole thing with a brown of some sort. I haven't figured out exactly what it's going to be. There's going to be a lot of browns in here, and I want to differentiate. I obviously don't want to use the same browns over and over, or else the whole thing is just going to go bleh. So, yeah, so some overbrushing. To get some contrast in before I wash it with some brown of some sort. So I'm going to go do that. And then when I come back, we'll work on these. We'll do the contrast in those, and then we'll do whatever brown is going to happen there. So see you in a bit. Okay, so as I said, I wanted to do this wildwood on those straps. Wildwood's pretty dark, but it matches up pretty well with the artwork in terms of color and darkness. And as I said, I'm using these contrast paints more and more. This is one of the ones that gets a fair amount of use. I might use this for weathering the metals too, but I don't know yet. I haven't experimented too much with that, but it might work. I think the only downside might be that I would end up with colors that were similar, maybe too similar. But since I'm going to be, oops, grab the wrong color. Since I'm going to be using other colors in the weathering, maybe that's okay. You know what? Maybe I'll even do a little experiment when I'm done with these straps. And we can both see how it goes. Yeah, this is good. It's a good color. Good color. Alright, so let's do this plate here. I'm just going to maybe put this, that's probably a little thicker than I wanted to go. I can pull some of it off before it dries though. Alrighty. I'm just cleaning my brush so I can sop some of this up. Ooh, I think that is, let's see, yeah, you can see that. I think that's pretty nice. I do believe that's going to work really well. In fact, I think what I'm going to do now, I did those straps. Oh, I also did I did overbrushing on his fur and on the fur on the armor here. The funny thing is, this fur and that fur doesn't appear in the art anywhere, so I'm kind of left to my own devices. I'm not going to do it the same color as that, though, because that would just be too much. I think what I shall do is use, this is Pro Acryl Mahogany, and I'm going to mix up a wash using the same stuff I did with the black. So I'm going to do 4 drops of Liquitex Airbrush Medium, and then 1 drop. Yes, of course, this is all happening off camera, sorry. 1 drop of the mahogany. It's going to make a very red brown. Let's see how that looks. I'm going to try to avoid the skulls so I don't have to re-base coat those. You seeing that? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And then I should be able to utilize the same color a little bit on the armor plates for rust. And since I'm only going to be using it a little bit, maybe it won't make the overall tones too samey. Although, you know, looking at the art, you have to admit that it's kind of monotone. The first time I saw the art, I thought it was specifically monotone. I thought it was a style choice, but it's not. There's some other colors going on there. Anyway, let me go ahead and finish this, and then I'm going to start applying that. The brown, the wildwood, to the metal, and that might take me a while. So when I come back, there'll be a lot more brown metal, and then we'll talk more about how to continue weathering that. So yeah, be back in a sec. What a difference a color makes, right? Pretty amazing overall, I would say. Things really starting to look like something now. So that's not done. It's a really good start, but I'm going to do some more colors on that in a minute. But right now, because I kind of want to, all the horns are just standing out there going, paint me. I'm going to go ahead and hit them with some skeleton horde, which I have to admit never really seems to work out as well as I'd hoped, but I keep trying. I keep hoping that, you know, one day I'm going to find the perfect thing that this works for. I think this is the least contrasty of the contrasts that I've used, and I haven't used all of them. But what I'm thinking is that this is actually going to match the artwork color pretty well, because the horns on the art are more yellow than they are like ivory, and I know that this skeleton horde color does about the right kind of yellowy sepia tone that I see in that art. Normally I would use, speaking of sepia, I would use oh man, why can I not remember the name of it? But it's the shade color, the Citadel shade color that is sepia. Something sepia. you're all like yelling at the screen right now going, it's this, and I know it's that. And as soon as I'm done recording here, I'll remember what it was. Seraphim, there it is. Seraphim Sepia, that's the one. Okay, I'm gonna go do the rest of these horns and the skulls, I believe, and then I'll come back. And I think I'm not gonna do the final weathering on the metal until I do everything else. So I think when I'm done here, I'm gonna do there's some leather bits here. And then I think we'll do the beast. And then I'm going to work on details, which will include the final weathering on the metal. So that's where we are. See you in a bit. Okay, I experienced a little camera meltdown. It overheated, and so I'm not sure exactly how much I lost. So I will tell you what I can recall that I did during that period. Face paint and body paint. So I utilized Warcolors Blue Gray 3, 4, and 5. I'm sorry, no, just 3 and 4. But I also did a highlight color mixing 3 and that highlight flesh tone that I used earlier to get all the blue in there. And let me see, what else did I do? I did the leather like I said I was going to do. And I've just been doing some touch-up on some of the metal. Not really touch-up, actually. Just a little bit of dry brushing to put some a little bit more metallic flake in it. This here, right now, this is metallic black, silver black, from Warcolors. And that's not going to be the final color, but I do kind of like where that is. And what else? Oh, the boots. The leather on the boots is a thin, it's a Citadel red-brown whose name escapes me. Anyway, it's really thin, kind of overbrushed over the dark brown that was already there with the contrast, because I didn't want it to get the full sort of reddy brown color. I wanted it to stay fairly dark because, again, this is a fairly dark piece. But I am going to use some more of that on... Oh, you know what I could use? I made that stipple brush. And I'm going to just add some of this red brown as a rust color in various little spots, especially in these pitted areas, to add a little rust color. It's not going to be very uniform at all. I'm just going to pick a few spots to put it in. And then I think I'm going to take, I've got a light umber color that I'm going to thin down a lot and wash it into some of the broad panels as well, to just dirty it up some, to do some weathering. So that's the name of that tune. And so let me go do that. I'll turn the camera off this time so it's not sitting here heating up, so that next time I get ready to shoot again, it doesn't die on me. And then I'm going to be looking at doing the beast. I think mostly he's got a good starting point color. I'm going to be washing him down though to darken him up and get some contrast in there. And I'm probably going to use I might be using the thin wildwood again, but maybe even thinner this time because I don't want it to go completely brown, but I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided. I do definitely want it to be sort of a brown gray. And then I got to do his hooves as well. Anyway, I'm going to go do the metal, finish up the metal, and then we can come back and talk about next steps. So we are moving on close to the finish line here. I think I want to make a little correction. I had talked about doing a light umber wash on the metal, but it's actually a dark umber from Pro Acryl. And in this case, the wash is really just with water and made very thin. So really, all I'm looking to do is deposit a little bit of the pigment thoroughly across the thing and letting it go ahead and build up in the crevices. But I'm not applying it as a wash so much. I guess really more of a more like a glaze, but really it's a weathering technique more than it is anything else. Because what I'm trying to do is just darken this up, make it a little bit browner and dirtier, and I do believe it has done that very well. Let's see if you can see it in the video. Again, my monitor does not do subtlety. The little the monitor I have to look this over. So I think the next thing I'm going to jump into here is the beast, and I again have not quite decided the direction I'm going to go, and so I'm kind of thinking out loud here, if you don't mind. I actually kind of like where the gray is here in general. Obviously, it's not done or anything, but it's kind of cool. You know what I'm going to try is I'm going to make a wash with Warm Gray 5, and this is on the same hue spectrum as the colors that are there now, but just on the darker end. I'm going to wash that in. We'll see where it goes. I have a feeling it's going to be not quite dark enough for what I want. Although this isn't a particularly light color or anything, but we'll see. Maybe it will give it enough contrast and yet still maintain the sort of color direction I want this to go. And I'm going to use... You know what? I think I'm going to use the Liquitex airbrush medium to do this mix, and I actually think I need to change my palette up. It is, well, it's drying out for one thing, and it's kind of full of other colors. So I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna update my palette. I'm gonna make a wash, and then I'm gonna come back and actually do the wash on camera, because I can do that. All right, just so you can see it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go 5 drops of that. And 1 drop of that. You know what? I'm going to go 2 drops. I'm going to make this a little heavier. I feel like that might be slightly too heavy. I'm going to add another drop of the Liquitex medium. All right, I'm going to use that and hope for the best. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm going to put it here in the face area. It's got the most definition. Yeah, I might just find myself building it back, building the highlights way back up from here, but we'll see. All right, I'll be back. So as I figured, it wasn't quite what I'd hoped. Yeah, it just wasn't dark enough, and I do think I wanted to go more brown. Again, this whole thing is a little bit monotone, at least the art that I'm basing it on, and he is supposed to be a dark brown and not really a gray. So I mixed up a 2-to-1 mixture of wildwood, which we've used a bit on this piece already. And that's 2 parts of the medium to 1 part of the contrast paint wildwood. And I'm just going to brush that in liberally. And again, not using this full strength because it would tend to make the whole thing go deep brown, especially as I'm the base color. And I'm just realizing this now. The base color is very dark compared to the way this stuff is normally recommended to be used. So yeah, it would just go kind of dead brown with no highlight whatsoever. But again, I can always go back if I need to with a highlight color. Doesn't need to be just this. So yeah, the contrast paints can be used in a lot of different ways, not just the way it says on the tin. And that's why I haven't quite figured out exactly how these fit into what I normally do completely. But I'm really enjoying the experimentation process of using them. So I do know that there is definitely a regular place for them on my paint rack. And I'll go finish this up and be back momentarily. Okay, it made it pretty dark brown. I'm going to lighten it up some. I'm going to start with the fluffy parts of this, and this is light umber, as I mentioned earlier. There's light umber from Pro Acryl. And I'm going to just dry brush this on here using another crappy brush. Actually, I'm kind of over brushing. This is not so much a dry brush. I think it might still be wet a little bit in there. And then, so anyway, that gives you a gist. But then I'm going to go ahead and create a really thin mix of that same color. Try to bring it into the rest of the flesh. Essentially just highlighting it. This may take a couple of passes. In fact, it will most certainly take a couple of passes to get it where I want it. I do like the Pro Acryl in this roll of sort of thin highlight coats. But you gotta really do it thin, or else it creates a streaky mess. Those horns are really getting in the way, huh? Let's see. Maybe here? Yeah. Oh, it's still a little bit thick. Add a little bit more water. Nope, now a little bit too much. This is probably going to need probably an airbrush pass to tie it all back together again. It's not bad though, honestly. I like where that's going. Let's see, once you kind of have it fully coated, you can go back in with another pass just on the highlight areas and keep building up the color in tighter and tighter areas to get the highlight, and it'll kind of work itself out without looking too streaky. But again, I can go back in with the airbrush and haze in some shadows, and that'll really make it look good. So let me go ahead and finish off the rest of that, and then I'll come back for the airbrush pass. Okay, rather than using what I might otherwise use in this situation, which would be a Watercolors Transparent, I really wanted to get the original dark umber color, well, the dark umber color that is in the same Pro Acryl line. Now, I normally don't have a good luck using Pro Acryl in this kind of situation, but I have thinned it heavily, like 5:1, with Liquitex airbrush medium, and that will sometimes alleviate the issues, but it still doesn't spray as smoothly as I'd like, and it's a little splotchy, but as long as I know that going in, it can work out. I'm not going to do a lot here either, because it's just I'm just re-accentuating the shadows, and I'm primarily going to just do this on the legs. I'm kind of happy with how the face looks. So this is just to get rid of some of the bad transitions from dark to light on the legs. And that's kind of it. And then I'm going to do the hooves next. Hooves. Oh, I should point this out. This is... So this plate here, I had painted, I think I mentioned this earlier, I'd painted it with the metallic Choco. And after I did that, I kept noticing that there was actually a line, like a mold line, very, very faint. It was completely invisible when I was doing the initial cleaning of the piece, but it was showing up here when doing the painting, and because this was a brighter metallic piece, it was totally going to stand out. So I went at it with a little bit, shaved off as much as I could with a knife, and then I used a little bit of plastic putty from Vallejo, which is kind of been my replacement for the liquid green stuff from Citadel, which I liked initially, but I've gotten enough bad bottles of that recently that I wanted to go back and try this again. I have tried this in the past, but they didn't have it in this friendly tube. They had it in a regular paint bottle, which was just dumb because it was one of their dropper bottles, and this stuff is not a liquid. It's more of a gel. Well, kind of. I guess it's more like a thick paint, but a thick paint that you would put in a tube, not one that you would put in a squeeze bottle. So anyway, once they moved this, I figured I had to try it. I've been using it. I like it just fine. But you know, even getting it out of this thing is not always the easiest thing in the world. But the product itself works well. So I'm waiting for that to dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and repaint that area as well. The other thing I'm going to do... Oh, so yeah, I'm going to do the hooves. Hooves. I did say hooves earlier. So I'm going to use, again, the Pro Acryl. And this, again, is... I just love using the Pro Acryl for... spot base coating, especially if I'm going to be using the contrast paints over the top of it. That just covers so well. It's really very well set up for the two thin coats school of base coating. See how nicely that covers? Now what's going to happen though is when this dries, you're going to discover that it's not quite as bright as you think it is. This doesn't really cover in a single coat, even though when you first do it, it looks like it does. But the second coat will make it solid if you feel like that's something you need on these hooves. I don't necessarily need for it to get full density in the color. Anyway, so I'm going to go do the rest of this. We'll come back for the wash pass. And I may do that while I'm out. If that dries, we'll see. Back in a sec. Okay, I think what was it called? The skeleton horde worked well on the horns, so I think it'll work well on the hooves. I did go back and touch that paint back up, so that looks really good. Pretty happy with how this is coming out overall. And to be quite honest, this isn't really taking all that long to do. I don't know if it's the contrast paints that are helping with the speed, or perhaps it is the relatively uniform nature of the color scheme. But whatever it is, this is going rather quick. I mean, to be fair, this video, long as it may be, and I don't know how this is going to, what the timing will be when we get it all edited down. But this has taken over the course of 2 days to do this all. I'm on day 2 right now, but it's really the beginning of it. And if I was doing this without the video, this would have been done in a single day, which is pretty crazy for something of this size. So now I just need to let that dry. And I will probably give it another coat because otherwise those things are going to stick out as being way too bright. And I think that's because of the ivory that I used, because these didn't have the ivory. They had the warm gray too, and not at full brightness. So yeah, that's why those are so much brighter. So anyway, we're going to let that dry, give it another coat, and I think I might work on the edge of the weapon. I don't know if we talked about this, but this had been primarily just brown, and then when I was working on some of the other metal with the Warcolors Black Silver, I just dry brushed it with the Black Silver just kind of to get a look, see how it looked, and I do like that. It's a really good color, especially for something like this. You know, he's supposed to be well, I mean, color palette wise he's pretty dark overall, but I would think that his metallic weapons aren't going to have a super bright sheen. I do want to add some sharpness to the edge metal, but I'm not going to take it too bright, but definitely brighter than it is right now. So that's what I'm thinking. So yeah, when I come back, I will have already done a second coat on those hoofs. I might actually take them down with the wildwood. I've still got some mixed up, and that might actually bring it down closer to where I want it to be. So I'll let you know when I get there. See you in a bit. So it's still not dry, and in the end it took another coat of the skeleton horde and then a coat of the wildwood, the thinned version, in order to get it to a tone that I thought was good. And now I'm going to play around with brightening the edges of the weapon, and I went back to the metallic lead. Again, this is the sort of lead belcher analog, and I'm just, to start with here, I'm going to dry brush the edge with this to slowly bring it up. I don't know if this is the right brush for this. I guess we'll see. Honestly, not sure how far I want to take this. I like it being dark. The metallic lead will leave it relatively dark, but still be brighter than the black silver. That edge seems to have a little bit of a, I don't know if you can tell, it has a little bit of a recess to it. So when I just do a straight dry brush, it doesn't catch the interior. So I kind of have to go in more directly to get it. I mean, that's not too bad that those edges get a little bit of extra highlight. It does sort of leave it looking a little bit battered, which is all right. All right, I have a little, or I'm going to add a little, and this is just metallic silver. This is super bright, so I'm not actually using this directly. I'm going to just slowly add a little bit to the lead. To brighten it up. And I think I'm going to focus on the outer edges here. To fully define the sharpest points. If I bring the brush in a little bit, it should give me a little bit more of an edge, a little bit broader of an edge. That's not too bad. Frankly, with all the studio lights I have going on, sometimes it's hard to see the metallics. It's almost better to look at the monitor. But overall, I'd say I like that. I think the effect looks pretty good. And I think that's where I'm going to end this. I am still going to do the base. I'm not going to do a lot with it. You might have noticed that it looks a little bit different than when we started, and I don't think I ever mentioned that I put a coat of desert yellow, Vallejo desert yellow, just mostly so I could see what it looked like. But I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to airbrush it with the warm gray 2, and not in a uniform coat. I'm just going to even it out a little bit, and then I'm going to figure out what to wash it with. And I think it's going to be Agaros Dunes. I've used this for base work recently, and I like how it looks, so we'll try that. And then what you'll see next are final photos. So I guess that wraps it up for you. For me, I still have some work to do. But for you, it's going to wrap it up, and momentarily you're going to see final photos. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's been a while since I've done one. If you're watching this, if you watch my videos regularly, you know that I have not been regular about doing my videos recently. I am trying to change that. I'm really working hard, and maybe I'll do a video at some point explaining to you why I have not been doing it. But for now, I'm going to wrap this up, call it done, and stay tuned for the pictures because they're coming now.